My brother sent me a selfie and mocked, "Thanks for the truck, bro. You're just the idiot with money bags." I said nothing. I froze the card, filed a lawsuit, and got him arrested. But what happened next? Exposed everything else. Sup Reddit. My brother stole my money for a truck using my identity, so I sued him. He thought family connections would save him. Federal prison disagreed. Turns out I wasn't the only one he'd scammed. Before we dive into this, let me set the scene for you. I, 29 male, have been working as an electrician in Kansas City for the past 8 years. Started as an apprentice making $12 an hour, getting shocked daily and treated like dirt by journeymen who thought hazing was a personality trait. Now I run my own crew, pull down 6 figures when the work's steady, and own my house outright in Brookside. Not bad for a guy who started with nothing but a high school diploma and a stubborn streak wider than I-70. Built everything from scratch. No family connections, no silver spoon. The early days were brutal. I remember this one job where I had to crawl through a century-old warehouse basement, dodging rats and asbestos insulation, running new wire for some cheapskate who thought code compliance was a suggestion. Spent 14 hours in that hellhole, came home looking like I'd been dragged behind a truck, and made $180 for the day. But every dollar went into my never work for someone else again fund. My breakthrough came when I landed a contract rewiring the old Kemper Arena after they decided to turn it into youth sports facilities. 6 months of steady work, decent crew, and enough profit to finally get my own truck and some real equipment. That's when I knew I could make this work. My brother Lucas? He's 26 and has mastered the art of professional disappointment. Dropped out of community college after 1 semester, bounced between entry-level retail jobs and get-rich-quick schemes that always ended the same way, with him calling me at midnight asking for bail money. I paid for his first semester, $2,800, because he swore he was going to study. When I found out he'd been spending his days at the student union playing video games, I drove to campus and had a conversation. "You want to drop out? Fine. But you're paying me back the tuition money. Bro, that's not how college works. Sometimes you have to pivot Sometimes you have to shut the hell up and finish what you started." He never paid me back. While I was crawling through 120-degree attics and getting my hands torn up on metal conduit, Lucas was posting TikToks about entrepreneurial mindset and explaining to anyone who'd listen why manual labor was for suckers without vision. My cousin Nate and I used to watch his videos when we needed a laugh after particularly shitty workdays. Nothing like watching your brother explain passive income while living in your parents' basement and stealing their food. Our parents? Complete enablers. Mom treated Lucas like he was Steve Jobs trapped in a Best Buy employee's body. Dad kept insisting that Lucas just needed the right opportunity. When Lucas got fired from GameStop for consistently showing up late, Mom's response was to drive him to work for 2 weeks until he found something else. When that something else turned out to be a pyramid scheme selling energy drinks, Dad sat through a 40-minute presentation about residual income. "He's got enthusiasm," Dad would say. "That's worth something." "So does a golden retriever," I'd reply. "Doesn't mean you give it a credit card." The family dynamic was simple. I was the responsible one who could handle his problems. Lucas was the creative one, who just needed more time to figure things out. What really burned my ass was the double standard. When I started my electrical business, I asked Dad for a small loan, $3,000 to cover equipment and licensing fees. His response? "Son, you need to learn to stand on your own feet. Building character means handling your own problems." But when Lucas needed money for his ventures, suddenly family support was crucial for success. For years, I played along. Family's family, right? I figured eventually he'd grow up, maybe learn what actual work looked like, possibly even thank me for keeping him afloat. Wrong. About 3 months before the truck incident, I made the mistake of thinking maybe Lucas just needed actual work experience. Real work. I had a residential job in Leawood, rewiring a lawyer's house built in the 1960s. The homeowner, Mr. Richardson, was one of those old-school guys who appreciated craftsmanship and paid on time. Easy money, straightforward work, and my crew could knock it out in 4 days. That's when I had my brilliant idea. Bring Lucas along as a helper. Give him a chance to see what real work looked like. Maybe learn a trade, possibly develop some goddamn work ethic. "You want me to what?" Lucas asked when I called him. "Work. I don't know anything about electrical work. That's why it's called learning. You carry tools, hand me stuff, and try not to electrocute yourself. $15 an hour to start." 15 an hour was generous for someone whose only qualification was sharing my DNA. But I figured if he could handle basic labor for a week without screwing up, maybe there was hope. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow. 7 a.m. sharp. Wear work boots and clothes you don't mind getting dirty. 7 a.m.? Dude, that's early. Day 1, Lucas rolled up at 8:30 a.m. Sorry I'm late. My alarm didn't go off, and then I had to stop for coffee because... Save it. Here's your safety gear. I handed him a hard hat, safety glasses, and work gloves. He looked at them like I'd given him medieval torture devices. Do I really need all this? It's just a house. You really want to explain to Mom why you're in the ER because you were too cool for safety equipment? For the first hour, things went okay. I had him organizing tools and carrying materials upstairs. Basic shit that even Lucas couldn't mess up. Then I asked him to grab my wire strippers from the blue toolbox in the truck. 10 minutes later, he came back empty-handed. They were sitting right on top. Lucas, are you serious? Yeah, there's like a million tools in there. I don't know what wire strippers look like. I went to the truck myself. The wire strippers were sitting right on top of the other tools, exactly where I'd left them. The breaking point came on day 3. I was working in the Richardson's daughter's bedroom. She was home from college for the summer. Nice kid, pre-med student, helping pay for school by working at the Country Club Plaza. I left Lucas organizing tools in the hallway while I ran new outlets along the baseboard. When I came back 20 minutes later, he was gone. I found him on the back patio, trying to get the girl's number. So you're studying medicine? That's cool. I'm actually an entrepreneur myself. Ever hear of social media marketing? The poor girl looked trapped, giving polite responses while clearly wanting to escape. When she saw me, relief flooded her face. Oh, good. Brody's back. I was just telling your brother about my organic chemistry class. I grabbed Lucas by the arm and pulled him aside. What the hell are you doing? Just being friendly. You said customer service was important. Customer service means being polite and professional, not hitting on the client's daughter while you're supposed to be working. I wasn't hitting on her. I was networking. That evening, Mr. Richardson pulled me aside as we were packing up. Brody, I don't want to tell you how to run your business, but your helper seems a bit unfocused. He spent 20 minutes explaining to my daughter why college was a waste of time. She's a Dean's List student working toward medical school. I wanted to disappear into the floor. The final disaster happened the next morning. I'd given him one simple task: move the extension ladder from the front yard to the backyard. He dragged the fully extended ladder around the house, caught a gutter, yanked down the power line, and knocked the meter half off the wall. I heard the crash from inside and came running out to find Lucas, standing next to a 40-foot ladder tangled in power lines, with the electrical meter hanging at a dangerous angle. It just got stuck, he said, like this was some unavoidable act of God. The power company had to come out and de-energize the line before we could fix anything. Mr. Richardson was without electricity for 6 hours. The repair cost me $1,200 out of pocket, plus a very uncomfortable conversation about liability insurance. I don't understand why you're so mad, Lucas said as I drove him home that evening. Accidents happen. Accidents happen when you're being careful and something goes wrong. This happened because you were being lazy and stupid. That was it. Done. No more chances, no more family favors, no more trying to help someone who didn't want to be helped. 3 months later, he hit me up with some new BS. He called during an emergency job. Some jackass had tried to install his own breaker box and nearly burned down half of Midtown. I was elbow deep in fixing his mess when my phone started exploding. Emergency! Need $1,800 today or I'm getting evicted. I left the job site to deal with his crisis. Spent 2 hours on the phone with his landlord, who explained very patiently that Lucas was 2 months behind on rent and had been too busy with projects to return his calls. The landlord, a guy named Steve, was actually pretty cool about it. Look, your brother seems like a nice kid, but nice doesn't pay rent. I've got bills too. What's he been telling you about the money situation? Said he was waiting on a big contract to come through. Some marketing deal that was going to pay him 15 grand. I almost laughed. Turns out he'd bought a $600 gaming chair the week before. When I called him out, he said it was a business investment, because apparently Twitch fame requires lumbar support. So I told him no, I wasn't helping. The meltdown was spectacular, screaming about how I'd forgotten where I came from and how success had made me look down on family. Then the tag team guilt assault began. Mom called crying about how Lucas would be homeless. Dad called with disappointment in his voice, asking if this was really the man I'd become. What if it was you who needed help, son? Dad, if it was me, I'd get a second job, or a first job, or any job. But the guilt worked. It always did. I caved. Sent them money. 3 weeks later, Lucas posted Instagram stories from some music festival, talking about investing in experiences over material things. That's when it hit me. I wasn't helping family. I was subsidizing a grown man's Peter Pan complex while my parents cheered from the sidelines. The big electrical contract I landed with the city? That was supposed to be my ticket to finally having some breathing room. Steady work for 2 years, crew of 8 guys, enough money to maybe think about getting married and starting my own family, which naturally made me an even juicier target for the family vultures. But I'd started saying no to the smaller requests, and that didn't sit well with them. The week before the truck incident, Lucas had been unusually quiet. No desperate phone calls, no sudden emergencies, no visits where he just happened to be in the neighborhood around dinner time. Nate texted me, "Heads up. Saw Lucas at the Ford dealership yesterday, pointing at trucks and talking on the phone. Looked sketchy as hell." Nate's the only family member with his head screwed on straight. Works construction, pays his own bills, calls bullshit what it is. When family dinners turned into Lucas pity parties, Nate and I would usually end up on the back porch talking about normal shit like sports and work, while the adults inside tried to solve the mystery of why Lucas couldn't hold a job. "Think he's finally getting a job that needs a truck?" I texted back. "Yeah, and I'm thinking about becoming a ballet dancer." Dude was wearing a button-down shirt that still had creases from the package. Nate texted me, "Heads up. Saw Lucas at the Ford dealership yesterday, pointing at trucks and talking on the phone. Looked sketchy as hell." We were both wrong. I should have listened, but I was busy with a commercial job downtown. I'm sitting in my truck after a 12-hour day, covered in dust and feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. Some genius contractor had wired an entire office building like he was playing electrical Jenga, and my crew spent the day fixing his amateur hour bullshit. The building owner was a real piece of work too. Kept asking why we couldn't just make it work instead of bringing everything up to code. Apparently, fire safety was optional in his world. All I wanted was a drink and 8 hours of sleep. That's when Lucas sent me a photo. Picture this. Brand new Ford F-150, candy apple red, sitting in our parents' driveway like it owned the place. Chrome running boards, tinted windows, the works. This wasn't some work truck. This was a $45,000 statement piece that screamed, "I'm compensating for something." Lucas is standing next to it with the biggest shit-eating grin I'd ever seen, keys dangling from his finger like he'd just won the lottery. Caption: "Thanks for the truck, bro. You're such an idiot." My blood pressure spiked so hard I thought I was having a stroke. See, we hadn't talked in over 2 weeks. Things had been tense since I started refusing to send money. So I opened my banking app. $8,200. Ford Motor Credit. Down payment processed. The hit came from a credit card I barely used. One of those emergency-only cards I'd gotten years ago and forgotten about. But somehow, Lucas had the number. Somehow, he'd convinced Ford Credit that he was me. I just sat there staring at the screen, engine still running, while every curse word cycled through my brain. The kid who'd spent months explaining why he couldn't keep a job at GameStop had just defrauded me for a luxury truck he had no business owning. But here's what he didn't know. I was done. I didn't call him, didn't text, didn't give him the chance to spin some bullshit story about misunderstandings or emergencies. First call, Ford Credit. I need to report fraudulent use of my credit for a vehicle purchase. Oh my, let me pull up the account. Yes, I see the transaction. Are you saying this wasn't authorized? Unless I've developed multiple personality disorder, no. I didn't buy a truck. I'll flag this immediately. The vehicle will need to be repossessed within 24 hours. Perfect. Don't call the person who picked it up. Just show up and take it. The Ford credit rep, a woman named Michelle, was actually helpful once she realized this was legitimate fraud. Turned out they'd been seeing more identity theft cases lately, and she walked me through the entire process. "We'll need you to file a police report and send us the case number. The faster you do that, the faster we can get this resolved." Already on it. Second call, Nate. "Are you busy tomorrow morning?" "Why? Want to watch Lucas's truck get repoed?" "Jesus Christ, what did he do?" "Stole 8 grand from me to buy it." Long pause. "I'll bring coffee." Nate later told me his first thought was that Lucas had finally crossed a line even our parents couldn't excuse. He was wrong about that too, but at least someone in the family had a functioning moral compass. Third call, criminal fraud hotline for Kansas City PD. Filed a report for identity theft, credit fraud, and forgery. Case number, documentation, the works. The cop who took my report was a guy named Officer Miller, who'd seen this kind of family fraud before. 9 times out of 10, it's relatives, he said. They think blood relation gives them access to your credit. What happens now? We investigate. If the evidence supports your claim, and it sounds like it will, we'll file charges. Fair warning, though. Family cases get ugly fast. He wasn't kidding. By 6 p.m., my phone was having a seizure. Call after call, text after text. Dude, what's happening? Ford says they're taking the truck back. This has to be some kind of mistake. Can you please call them and fix this? I texted back, talk to my lawyer. Which was bullshit. I didn't have a lawyer yet. But Nate's brother-in-law was a prosecutor, and he'd given me a name. Ellie Smith, a woman who specialized in financial crimes and apparently ate fraud cases for breakfast. I called her office. I laid out the whole story. The truck, the photo, the history of Lucas treating me like his personal bank. When I got to the part about him using my credit card without permission, she made this sound. Not quite a laugh, but definitely satisfaction. How old is your brother? 26. Good. Adults get adult consequences. Can you be here at 9 a.m. tomorrow? Absolutely. That night, I got a call from Dad. Brody, we need to talk. This whole thing with the truck is getting out of hand. You're right. Your son committed multiple felonies. That's definitely out of hand. It's not that serious. He made a mistake, but, Dad, he stole my identity to buy a truck. Not borrowed money. Stole my identity. He's family, Brody. Family doesn't sue family. Family doesn't commit felonies against family either. But here we are. I hung up. My phone rang again immediately. I turned it off. The next morning, Nate showed up at 7 a.m. with coffee and donuts. Ready for the show. We parked across the street from my parents' house and waited. At 8:47 a.m., a tow truck pulled up with two guys who clearly did this for a living. The repo team was efficient as hell. Just hooked it up and rolled out like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Lucas came running out of the house in pajama pants, waving his hands like he was directing air traffic. Even from across the street, we could hear him yelling, "There's been a mistake! That's my truck!" The repo guy didn't even slow down, just hooked it up and drove away. Lucas stood in the driveway for 10 minutes, staring at the oil stain where his truck used to be. That, Nate said, taking a sip of coffee, is the most beautiful thing I've seen all week. Then I went to Ellie's office. Your brother's in deep shit, she said, not bothering with small talk. Identity theft, credit fraud, forgery if he signed your name anywhere. We're looking at potential felony charges. What are my options? Civil suit for $8,200, plus damages for time and emotional distress. Or we go full nuclear and push for criminal charges. Both, if you're feeling ambitious. Let's go nuclear. Filing took less than 2 hours. By noon, Lucas had been served with papers and a court date. My phone exploded again. This time, it was Mom. Have you lost your mind? A lawsuit? How could you do this to your brother? He's devastated. Good. Maybe next time he'll think twice before committing felonies. You're destroying this family. No, Mom. Lucas destroyed this family when he decided to steal from me. I'm just making it official. She hung up. For a week, everything went quiet. No more charges on my cards. No more panic calls. I actually started to think maybe the legal reality had knocked some sense into him. Then he showed up at my job site. I was up on a ladder, running wire through a ceiling, when one of my guys yelled, "Hey, Brody! Someone here to see you!" I climbed down to find Lucas standing next to my truck, holding his phone like it contained the world's most important message. He actually looked calm, humble even. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "I know I screwed up. I know you're pissed. I've been thinking about ways to make this right. This threw me off. This wasn't the Lucas I knew, the one who treated every confrontation like he was the victim of circumstances beyond his control. I can't afford a lawyer," he said. "I was hoping we could work something out. I'll get a job, set up payments, whatever you need." And here's where I got stupid. Part of me wanted to believe him. Maybe it was wishful thinking. Maybe I just wanted to believe that losing his toy truck had finally scared him straight. "Can we talk? Just 10 minutes. I don't want this to go to court." So I told my crew to take lunch and walked with him to a nearby diner. For 30 minutes, he was the brother I'd always hoped he could be. He apologized without making excuses. He acknowledged that what he did was wrong. He even showed me his phone with 3 job applications submitted that morning. "I know I've been a shitty brother," he said. "I know I've taken advantage. I want to change that." After he left, I sat in that diner booth, actually considering dropping the charges. Maybe this really was different. Maybe losing his dream truck had done what years of lectures couldn't. Then my phone buzzed. Declined transaction. $3,200. Argosy Casino Riverside. My heart dropped into my work boots. The charge was from the same credit card he'd used for the truck, one I'd forgotten to cancel because I figured the fraud alert would protect it. While I was still staring at the decline notification, another text came in. From him. "Guess your credit's screwed now too. Maybe next time don't be such a dick to family." I screenshot everything and sent it to Ellie. Then I called the cops. The Kansas City PD didn't mess around. They arrested Lucas the next morning for identity theft, attempted fraud, and violation of a restraining order. Apparently showing up at my job site counted. 5 days in county jail. Not long enough to write a memoir, but long enough to think about his choices. Ellie also got me a protective order. Lucas was legally banned from contacting me, coming to my house, showing up at job sites, or pretty much existing in the same zip code as me. That's when my parents really showed their true colors. The voicemail started immediately. "You've gone too far. He's your brother. This is not how we raised you. Do you want him to have a criminal record? How will that help anyone?" Notice they weren't asking how I was doing. Weren't checking if I was okay after being robbed and threatened by my own brother. Nope. It was all about poor Lucas and how cruel I was being. Nate called me after talking to our Aunt Sarah. "Your parents are telling everyone you overreacted and that Lucas was just borrowing the money. Borrowing without asking is called stealing." Yeah, well, they're not seeing it that way. They're painting you as the villain who destroyed the family over money. 2 weeks later, I was back in court. Ellie presented everything like she was teaching a master class in how to destroy someone who thought they were untouchable. The truck purchase, the casino attempt, the texts, his complete lack of remorse. Lucas showed up this time with a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The judge wasn't having any of it. $8,200 in restitution, plus $5,000 for emotional distress and court costs. $13,200 total, plus probation and mandatory financial counseling. "Your Honor," Lucas's lawyer said, "my client is unemployed and has no assets." "Then he'd better find some," the judge replied. "Garnishment order approved. Any future income, tax returns, or assets will be seized until this judgment is satisfied." Lucas's face went white. Ellie leaned over and whispered, "That judgment follows him forever. Credit destroyed, background checks flagged, can't get decent employment. The consequences will outlast your anger by decades." That was fine by me. I wasn't in it for the money anymore. I was in it for the principle. But we weren't done. Not even close. Dad sent me a text. "Lucas is in real trouble. We need to talk." I ignored it. He called an hour later. I let it ring. The voicemail started with the usual guilt trip, but then he said something that made me actually listen. "He owes some very dangerous people money, Michael. I'm not exaggerating. I called Nate to see if he'd heard anything. He had. Your brother's been gambling. Hard. Online poker, sports betting, even driving to the casinos in Riverside and North Kansas City. Apparently, he owes some loan shark in Independence about 15 grand. That's when the real story came out. Lucas hadn't just been financially irresponsible. He'd been living in a complete fantasy world. The truck was supposed to be part of some image-building scheme. He thought if he looked successful, he could attract investors for his social media empire. But instead of investors, he'd attracted predatory lenders, casino hosts from Argosy and Ameristar, and people who broke kneecaps for a living. My parents knew. They'd known for months. While they were lecturing me about family loyalty, they'd been covering his gambling debts and trying to fix him behind the scenes. The cherry on top? They'd taken out a second mortgage to pay off the loan shark. $25,000 against the house they'd owned free and clear for 15 years. "They want you to drop the lawsuit," Nate said. "They think if Lucas doesn't have a criminal record, he can get a better job and pay everyone back." I laughed. They mortgaged their house for a gambling addict, and they want me to make it easier for him? That's the size of it. Screw that, and screw them. But Nate wasn't done. There's more. Remember Lucas's ex-roommate Tyler? The one who moved out like 6 months ago? Yeah, what about him? Ran into him at Home Depot yesterday. He's still pissed about Lucas owing him money. Apparently it wasn't just the security deposit Lucas never gave back. According to Tyler, Lucas had borrowed $1,200 for emergency car repairs that never happened. Instead, Lucas had used it for some cryptocurrency investment that went belly up in 3 days. When Tyler demanded his money back, Lucas fed him some story about waiting for an insurance settlement that was totally fictional. Tyler's been trying to get his money back for 8 months. Says Lucas keeps promising to pay him, but never does. That same week, Nate heard from Mrs. Johnson, our elderly neighbor, who'd always been soft on Lucas. Turns out he'd borrowed $800 from her for job training courses that would help him get a better position. The courses were real. They just cost $50, not $800. Lucas pocketed the difference. "She's embarrassed," Nate said. "Doesn't want to cause trouble, but she's on a fixed income, and that money meant a lot to her." And then the big revelation came from Nate's girlfriend, who worked at the bank where my parents did their banking. "She can't give details because of privacy laws, but she mentioned that your parents have been in there a lot lately. Loan applications, second mortgage paperwork, bunch of cash withdrawals. Said your dad looked like he'd aged 10 years. That's when everything clicked. The reason my parents had been so desperate for me to help Lucas, so insistent that families should stick together, so willing to excuse his behavior, they'd been bankrolling his disaster for months, and were running out of money. The next family gathering was my cousin Chloe's wedding shower. I didn't want to go, but Nate convinced me. You'll regret missing it, and besides, maybe we'll learn more about what's really going on. My parents were there, looking uncomfortable and whispering to relatives in corners. I overheard Mom talking to my aunt about difficult times, and Dad mentioning something about temporary financial setbacks. During the gift opening, I noticed my parents gave Chloe a $25 Target gift card. These were people who used to give $200 cash gifts for weddings. The same people who'd just taken out a second mortgage to cover their son's gambling debts. After the shower, Nate and I were loading presents into cars when Tyler showed up. Apparently, he was dating one of Chloe's friends and had been invited. Brody! Hey man, I heard about the truck thing. That's so fucked up. Yeah. Well, Lucas is gonna be Lucas. Did you know he's been telling people you stole his truck? Like, he's actually trying to play the victim in this whole thing. That was news to me. What's he saying? That you got jealous of his success and used your connections to have his truck repossessed. Says you're trying to sabotage his business because you can't stand seeing him do well. Tyler also mentioned that Lucas had tried to borrow more money from him just 2 weeks earlier. Another $500 for business equipment. When Tyler reminded him about the $1,200 he still owed, Lucas acted like that was ancient history. The balls on this guy. Absolutely incredible. 2 days after the wedding shower, Mom called me. Not the usual guilt trip call, but something different. She sounded tired, defeated. Michael, I need to tell you something. About Lucas. About all of it. I'm listening. Long pause. Can you come over? I don't want to do this on the phone. I almost said no. Part of me figured this was just another manipulation tactic. Another attempt to get me to drop the charges. But something in her voice stopped me. I drove to their house that evening. Dad was conspicuously absent. Working late, according to Mom, though I suspected he just couldn't face the conversation. We sat at the kitchen table where I'd done homework as a kid. Mom had made coffee, but neither of us touched it. I don't know where to start, she said. How about with the truth? She took a shaky breath. Lucas has been using our credit cards. For months. We didn't know at first. The bills would come, and there would be charges we didn't recognize. But Lucas always had explanations. What kind of explanations? He said he was buying equipment for his business, or that he'd used our card because his was maxed out, but he was going to pay us back when his contracts came through. The contracts that never existed. The business that was never real. How much, Mom? $28,000. I felt my stomach drop. $28,000. No wonder they'd been so desperate for me to help him, so panicked about him having a criminal record. We kept thinking the next payment would cover everything, she continued. He kept showing us these apps on his phone, these websites about cryptocurrency and online marketing. He made it sound so legitimate. And you believed him? I wanted to believe him. Your father wanted to believe him. We kept thinking this was finally it, his big break. The worst part? Lucas had been forging their signatures on credit card applications. 3 different cards, all maxed out within months. When the payments became unmanageable, he convinced them to take out a second mortgage. He said the business was about to take off, that we'd be able to pay everything back within 6 months. He had these charts, these projections. The mortgage payment is $380 a month, Mom said quietly. We'll be paying it until your father is 75. I sat there processing this information. My parents, people who'd paid off their house early, who'd never carried credit card debt, who'd saved responsibly their entire lives, had been financially destroyed by their own son. Why didn't you tell me? We were embarrassed and scared. Lucas kept saying he was about to turn everything around. Mom, he's never turned anything around. Ever. In his entire life. I know that now. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Finally, I asked the question I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to. What happens now? I don't know. Your father thinks we should sell the house, downsize to an apartment, use whatever equity is left to pay off the credit cards. And Lucas? Lucas doesn't get to come back. Ever. I told him yesterday. That surprised me. For all their enabling, my parents had finally reached their limit. She started crying then. Genuine grief for the son she'd lost and the life they'd built that was now gone. I keep thinking about what we did wrong, where we went wrong. Maybe if we'd been stricter when he was younger. Lucas is 26. He made adult choices. This isn't your fault. I meant it. For all their enabling, my parents were victims too. They'd been manipulated and lied to by someone they trusted completely. Before I left that night, Mom asked me one more question. Do you think he'll ever get better? Do you think he'll ever change? I thought about it for a moment. Not until he faces real consequences. The federal case was solid. Too much evidence, too many victims, too many lies that were easy to disprove. When the prosecutor laid out all of Lucas's schemes, the truck fraud, the casino attempts, the credit card theft from our parents, the money he'd stolen from Tyler and Mrs. Johnson, it painted a picture of someone who'd been systematically defrauding everyone in his life for over a year. Lucas tried to plea bargain. The feds offered 18 months if he paid full restitution to everyone. Problem was, he owed about $42,000 total across all victims and had negative net worth. My parents had already drained their savings trying to cover his gambling debts. They'd taken out that second mortgage for $25,000 and still couldn't cover everything he owed. The trial lasted 3 days. I testified on day 2, laying out everything from the truck purchase to the casino attempts. Lucas got 2 years federal prison, 3 years probation, and full restitution orders for everyone he'd scammed. My parents lost their house 6 months later. Had to sell it to pay off the second mortgage and cover what they could of Lucas's debts. Now they are renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Raytown. But here's the thing about consequences. They don't stop when the gavel comes down. When Lucas got out after serving 18 months, he found out what the real world looks like for a federal felon. Background checks for every job application. Credit reports that showed multiple fraud convictions. Landlords who wouldn't rent to someone with his record. Nate kept me updated through the family grapevine. Lucas was couch surfing, picking up cash-only day labor when he could find it, and getting turned away from every legitimate job when they ran his background. The internet made it worse. Every potential employer who searched his name found the same information. Federal convictions for identity theft and fraud. Within 6 months of getting out of prison, he couldn't get hired anywhere legitimate. Couldn't rent an apartment without someone running a background check and rejecting his application. Even when he tried using fake references, one Google search of his name told the whole story. He tried moving to different cities. It didn't matter. Your criminal record follows you everywhere, and his was particularly damning. Last I heard, he was living in a weekly motel in Independence, trying to survive on odd jobs and food stamps. My parents reached out one last time, through Nate. They wanted to know if I'd consider helping Lucas get back on his feet, now that he'd paid his debt to society. Nate delivered my response. That debt follows him forever. If they don't like it, they can move to Independence and help him personally. A year later, I got a wedding invitation in the mail. Not from family, from Ellie, my lawyer. She was marrying a prosecutor she'd met during Lucas's case. At the reception, she pulled me aside. You know, your brother's case made my reputation. I've gotten dozens of financial fraud clients since then. Happy to help. There's something else. Your brother was arrested again last month. Check fraud in Arkansas. Apparently some things never change. I wasn't surprised. People like Lucas don't learn. They just find new victims in new places. But this time, it wasn't my problem. I finished my drink and drove home to my paid-off house and my paid-off truck, with my healthy bank account and my clean conscience. Some bridges are meant to be burned, then salted, then nuked from orbit, just to be sure. Lucas learned that lesson the hard way. I learned it was the only way to finally get some peace.